I call this meeting to order. This is the regular meeting of the Northfield Public School Board. Today is Monday, March 8th, 2021, and the time is 7:00 p.m. We are present this evening in our new school board meeting room located at Northfield Public Schools District Offices, formerly Longfellow School. In accordance with Governor Walz's Stay Safe plan, this room has been set up in accordance with the plan's social distancing guidelines. In addition, all those present at the meeting will be wearing face coverings. Also attending tonight's board meeting via teleconference are Erin Bailey, Director of Community Education, Kim Brisky, Director of Technology Services, Joel Lear, Principal, Northfield High School, and Val Murdersdorf, Director of Finance. This meeting is open to the public via live stream. The recording of this meeting will be posted on the district's website as soon as possible. Dr. Hillman, there were a few personnel items in the table file.
Yes, this evening in the table file, we had some appointments, increase, decrease, change in assignment, some leaves of absence, and grant application approval.
Okay, thank you. If there's no objections, we'll add these items to the agenda as we move forward. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
Motion.
Moved by Jeff. Is there a second? Second by Tom. All those in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We now have an opportunity for public comment. This is an opportunity for residents, business and property owners, parents, students, and employees of the Northfield Public School District to address the board. To accommodate the public comment portion of our meeting, we made available on the district's website the ability for the public to submit feedback to the board via email by 5 p.m. today. We did not have any public comment submissions for this evening. So we can now move on to announcements and recognitions. Dr. Hillman.
Yes, and the only announcements I have this evening are just a little bit about some reminders about the technology in our new space. So when board members are going to speak, I just encourage you, of course, to press the button on your microphone. It lights up with a red light. And then we need to speak clearly into the microphone as I'm doing now. Now, when you're done and you turn it off, you can then move it side to side, move it away from your mouth if you'd like to. But to get the best sound, we're going to need to do it just like this. And then in addition, I want to thank our technology team, Tim and Bruce in the back there. We're using our new recording and Zoom equipment for the first time. So they're learning tonight. So for folks at home, we anticipate it's going to go well, but of course, anytime you use a new setup for the first time, there's bound to be a few hiccups here and there. So with that, we thank Bruce and Tim. Thanks for your work in the back there. And we will enjoy this new technology for this meeting and going forward.
Yes, thank you. We are really excited to be in our new home. It's just a great space for our meetings. So with that, we can move on for items for discussion and report. Our first item is the high school mascot refresh. And here to discuss that is Northfield High School Principal Joel Lear. Welcome, Joel.
Try that again. Thank you, Julie, and greetings to all of the board members. I appreciate the opportunity to come share some of the details of where we are at with the process of updating and refreshing the Raider logo. As you remember, earlier this past year, you had directed both Joel Olson, our activities director, and myself to pursue a process that would ultimately result in the submission of a refreshed logo to you. And our intent is to bring that official request for approval to you at the first meeting in April. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of know where we have been to this point. We asked for submissions from community and school community members and received 21 possible submissions. Some of them were, and they really ranged from polished, in some cases, copyrighted logos that people brought in from websites that they wanted us to consider, at least conceptually, as something that we would pursue as a refreshed logo, all the way to original drawings that again were probably more conceptual than considered in their final perspective. And so we brought those 21 samples to a committee of students, staff, alums, parents, community members, and remember all the stakeholders. Some of those were duplicate members of that committee. And so that committee met the week before last and reviewed the 21 logos and ultimately settled on some general concepts around those submissions. So initially, when Joel and I talked about the submission process, we originally planned that we would have a series of submissions that we would then choose finalists for. But as we got closer to the process, it seemed to make more sense to say that if there were aspects of logo A and B that could be combined, or that there were just simply aspects of a particular logo that people liked that without necessarily committing to that specific design, that we would move those forward and present those to newer communications. So we ended up with I would describe a list of 6 to 7 conceptual items for an updated logo. And then I met with representatives from Nuger early last week and explained those conceptual pieces, as well as some of the stakeholder preferences, I guess you would say, in terms of not only some of the things that you as a board had asked that the logo represent, that it not be a specific person, that it not have weapons, that it be simple to recreate, that it be that it consider gender neutrality, and so all of those pieces, as well as some of those preference and conversation pieces that occurred at that with that task force. And so Nuger then has set to work as of last week, and they're anticipating early this week, so that could be as early as tomorrow, potentially, that they will come back with approximately 3 to 5 conceptual designs. And one of the things that those, some of the things that those designs how they may vary in type would be, some mascots have a menacing or aggressive look. Other mascots have a more neutral or friendly look. So they were going to dabble with kind of all layers of that continuum. And so we're looking forward to see what those conceptual pieces are that Nuger comes back with. And those served a couple of reasons. One, we were always straightforward in the process that we were going to ask that Nuger as a professional agency do some polishing, if you will, but also knowing that some of the logos that were presented as conceptual ideas were copyrighted. And the truth of the matter is that we need to have an original logo. And so even if the concepts came from copyrighted material, that ultimately the design that is brought to you is indeed an original work. So when we get those back, we'll bring those back to the task force, an opportunity for that task force to kind of not necessarily vote on those, but to critique them and offer some potential revision suggestions to Nuger. And that was actually a piece that Nuger suggested we do. It wasn't originally part of the timeline leading up to that April meeting. And then ultimately we will then take those final concepts to the student body and offer an opportunity for the student body to review them and submit kind of a preference, if you will, a vote, not a binding vote necessarily, but we thought that it'd be fair that as the current students that are represented by that logo, that you as a board have an opportunity to kind of hear their tendencies. So you could, witness anything from a significant majority of students indicating that a particular refreshed logo is their preference, to a balance across our student body. So you at least have that sense of feedback from that task force, and then also from our current student body. So, and then coming out of that, we will present our findings and ultimately our option for a logo for you to approve at that first meeting in April.
Thank you, Joel.
Mhm.
Questions and comments board members have? Tom.
Thanks, Joel.
Mhm.
Is this on?
It is. I can hear you.
I do. You can, okay. Maybe I just can't hear it above me, which is good. So the students are going to vote on this, and this will be before the next board meeting. So we got spring break in there. Do you know about when that will occur that the students will vote?
Well, preferably before spring break. So the folks at Nuger thought that, like I said, in the first couple of days here this week, we would have those designs back. We meet virtually as a task force, so it's fairly straightforward and quick to assemble the group of students and other stakeholders for that process. And it's possible that what the designs that we're reviewing in that stage, the students are satisfied with moving them forward to that advisory vote. But we do, we want to allow a little bit of time for returning them to Nuger with any sort of tweaks or adjustments or our own polishing, if you will. So our intent would be that if we are able to get it in before spring break, fantastic. But depending on what that one stage that I'm referencing to that may or may not happen in terms of a review that goes back to Nuger for some polishing, then shortly after we return from spring break, then those first few days after spring break, we would do that vote among our student body.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Other questions, comments? Jeff?
Thanks for your work on that. I actually wanted to be a little bit more involved in the process than I am so far. And I'd also like to point out that there's probably about 30,000 alumni out there that, I'd like to see some more feedback from, stakeholders that actually graduated from the school. I appreciate the students that we currently have, but I think a logo goes deeper in the long run. And I'm just wondering if you could expound a little bit on who you've got on your committee to as far as stakeholders for feedback on that. And I think it's a great combination to come up with the concepts and then, give the ball to Nuger for a while. It sounds like, the process is reasonably good. So we'll just see what you end up with. And I haven't, I've seen a few things, but I sure hope that I like what you're coming up with.
Sure. Well, in terms of our group, what Joel and I tried to assemble in our task force was really the most efficient, but then also wide sweeping, if you will, range of stakeholders. So like I said, we have current students across our fine arts and our fine arts activities as well as our sport activities. The alumni ranged from what I will call seasoned alum to a graduate from this most recent year, actually, who you met in the conversation that began this process of reviewing and opting to update our logo. So feel pretty good about the representatives that I mentioned, the staff members, and in some cases, those are overlapping positions. So people who come at it as parents, as staff members, as community members, and as alums. So we have, a number of folks who were able to participate in that conversation. And I think all felt included in the process, but also very positive about the process, that it went very, very well. And I think, one of the pieces about the updated, the refreshed logo that in the initial stages of this conversation, when kind of it went to the media as a discussion about updating the logo, I think what the initial kind of response was the understanding that we were removing the nickname Raiders, and we were going to be switching to a different logo entirely, or a different nickname. And I think in the time since we've really kind of clarified that piece, I think people are excited and interested to see what the new design looks like. But I do think that there was certainly an interest in promoting the push to keep Raiders as our nickname, and I think a little more openness to pursue an updated logo, like colleges, schools, professional organizations have done for a long time. I was actually talking with one of the members of the committee that, I went to high school for 3 years. My high school was a 10-12 building. And in the 3 years I was there, we had 2 different logos. And I had entered the high school with a third one. So, obviously there are some schools that commit to a really long-term relationship, if you will, to a particular logo. But I think that what we've done to this point and the people that have been involved have put us in a pretty good spot to move forward toward that April board meeting when we bring it to you.
Yes, Jeff?
Yeah, I'd say maybe share a little more on the basic concepts, but maybe you don't want to let the cat out of the bag. So did you see anything from your committee meeting of, maybe a couple of themes that came out of that as far as any consensus or moving forward? But I think that basically you've got what you've got and it's kind of a half-baked cake at this point. So maybe you just want to wait and see what Nuger polishes up and comes up with too.
Sure. And I would say, as we looked at, and I'm just going to use, Jeff, the male, female, the interest in appropriately representing both male and female athletes and members of our student body. Obviously, when you start talking about Raiders and you start talking about the Jesse James raid, you really narrow the field in terms of ways that you could represent that nickname with a mascot that's gender neutral. So as we talked about, the specifics of an image that would kind of embody that component of our community's history, folks were really, interested in pursuing, how you might go about designing that particular logo with the features of, say a hat or a bandana or those types of things where you can embody the spirit of what that history is and represents to us as Northfield community members, but also to acknowledge the fact that we know more now than we used to about the importance of being concerned with being gender neutral and race appropriate and other pieces that have kind of made the idea of mascots a little problematic. So I'm excited by it. It was a rich conversation. We had a very diverse group of current students, as well as I would say a diverse group across the board. And so those were the types of conversations we had. Could we look at it, the main piece being an animal of some sort, or was it a preferred logo that was kind of the mainstay of the human being? One of the things the committee really settled on was the importance of having a logo with a Northfield N that could then kind of be lifted out of that particular logo and be a standalone, like the current N that we have, but somehow kind of melding the two of those together. So we have this, if you think about a baseball hat N, for example, that the N from there is something that is kind of lifted from this final design. So it was those types of conversations that we had that ultimately led us to the list of ideas that we presented to Nuger.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments? Noel?
I'm glad I'm not on this committee. I would find it difficult trying to figure out how to make a menacing logo for a football team and a very gentle logo for the theater. And I think that's very difficult, and I congratulate the folks on pulling this off. I would say that it must be a thing to do because my high school, the college I went to, and now the high school, Northfield High School, are all looking at new logos. And some are going menacing and some are going very gentle. So it must be the thing to do.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Thank you, Joel, for your work and for the committee's work. I had one question about the process, and I know we have a timeline, obviously, but we need to take our time, obviously, to get this right.
Yeah.
My question where would it make sense in the process to ensure that it can be replicated via screen printing, embroidery, on apparel items, water bottles, things like that, to get maybe the, some of the industry, knowledge to help us discern, that capability and the ease of that. And then multicolor, like, is there a one color and a multicolor so that, when you're screen printing a garment, the more colors you have, the more expensive it is. So when there's trying to be some budgets for different teams or activities or some, different choices in terms of the budget and replicating, and then of course in print media as well. So I'm just wondering when we think that might make sense to pursue in terms of when in the process that would make sense to.
Sure. And I think, and one thing I will add to that, Julie, before I get specifically to the answer, the folks at Nuger have that consideration in mind from the get-go. So even in the design process, in the review process that we underwent with the task force, they were looking at that list of identifying criteria, if you will, that you had set forth for us in the process of updating this logo. So as we looked at the idea of saying relatively simple to recreate, that was one of the, and I reminded the committee of that before we started the review. And there were actually multiple times during the course of that conversation where students and others on the stakeholder committee said, well, that one's going to be pretty easy to reproduce. In fact, even to the point where they were saying, well, this would be great on a lapel, or this would be great on the shoulder of a jersey or the shoulder of a jacket. And so they were very mindful of that. I shared that particular piece with Nuger, and they understood fully. But it would be a very easy and I think fairly simple process to bring it to some of our local vendors who do a lot of recreating of the logo, and just to confirm and get their blessing. I know that at least 2 of our vendors in town are very excited to get the new logo and to begin to produce items with those updates on them. And the other piece, that quite frankly, the current logo is a complicated thing to reproduce. So there's a part of me that kind of says, well, as long as we do something, it's going to be easier to replicate. But we can absolutely do that, and I'd be happy to actually do that firsthand with our local vendors.
Excellent. Thank you. I think that's a worthwhile step to take. Just asking them, they do it every day. So they could maybe have some good suggestions for us. So
Absolutely.
I think that is it for board members' questions or comments. We are looking forward to our April meeting when we'll see some of the concepts that come forward and hear in more detail the process. And as you know, we only have one board meeting in March. So at our first board meeting in April, we will take the next step. Thank you, Joel, and thank you for the work and for the committee's work.
Absolutely. You bet. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, we will move on now to our next item on the agenda, which is the teacher laptop lease refresh. And here to discuss that is Director of Technology Services, Kim Brisky. Welcome, Kim.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for having me tonight, Julie, and whole board. You've seen, I think, the presentation already in your packet, along with a narrative and a document that just showed feedback from staff regarding this recommendation to move forward with MacBook Air laptops. So I'll walk you through the overview here. And of course, if there are questions, certainly let me know as we get to the end here. So this is just an overview of the lease. This is what I shared with teachers when I asked for their feedback regarding the recommendation for the center one here of the MacBook Air. We currently have a lease of MacBook Pros that were from late 2016. They have very similar, well, they're exactly the same size as both of the ones that we're looking at right now. And then they have the same screen resolution, the same ports on them as the ones that we were looking at getting. The big difference comes in the rest of the internal workings of those 2 machines, where you can see the red on these 2 on the right, that they have the new Apple M1 chip, which is a significant improvement. We've all been hearing about this and waiting for it, and now it's here, and several of us are testing it out, and it is excellent so far. They have increased solid state drives, the hard drives on the actual computers, increased RAM, so the kind of operating memory on the computers, and then the cameras and the battery life. The cameras are the same. The battery life is significantly higher on both of the 2 models that we would look at for renewing this lease. So right now, the laptops that we've been using have a battery life of up to 10 hours. That's what they were advertised as when we got those laptops. The ones that we're looking at getting have a battery life of up to 18 hours. And I will say that has been performing around that time on the battery charge. So that's pretty awesome. So the MacBook Air is what I'm recommending based on the very clear similarities to a MacBook Pro of the same type, I guess, the same year. So we look at kind of the overall what we've done with our lease in the past. We have right now 350 MacBook Pros. We did also lease at the same time 40 MacBook Airs, which were distributed to buildings for our substitute teachers. And I think you maybe saw in the feedback, people asked for the same connections with the daily sub and the teacher computers, which right now we don't have, but we will have moving forward. We did that because there was a significant price difference between the MacBook Airs and the MacBook Pros. And we knew that those substitute laptops would not be requiring large amounts of software running all at the same time. They would be running through the daily teacher plans and needed to just run that software for the day. We also at that same time leased 125 Apple TVs, which are installed throughout the district. And the total lease cost per year of that lease is $141,537. So the proposal is to go with 400 MacBook Airs, given that now the MacBook Air can have similar performance to the MacBook Pro and definitely a performance improvement over the current MacBook Pros that we have. And the cost for that lease comes in at $127,400 per year. And then the last part there about our fiscal year 22 capital allocations approval is that in December, when we look at our capital expenditures for the upcoming year, we take the technology lease right at the top pretty much, because we know that there's going to be some ongoing relatively consistent costs there that will allow us to have updated computers as we move through the years. And so we don't end up with outdated technology that is not able to perform for the needs of the current time. So at that time, we did the allocation with the number of 410 MacBook Pros. And that's before we had really realized that the Air was an option with the similar technology specifications to the Pro. And so we approved the capital allocations process. We approved a lease of 410 MacBook Pros, or not a lease, but the number that would go with that lease at an amount of $161,848 per year. So there's kind of the overview of what we're looking at. You will see there was one question that even said, what are you not telling us? What are you hiding from us? There's got to be a difference if there's this significant cost difference between the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro. And there are some differences. There were also some comments from staff about durability of the two models, and I couldn't find anything about any differences in durability of the actual physical structure of the computer. They are made from the exact same materials. The differences between them are that the Pro has a touch bar. So in that image, you can see that top little bar above the number row of keys. And that is a dynamic bar that changes. It has touchscreen buttons that appear on it based on the program that you are using. And so it changes, and you can use those touchscreen images. It does not add functionality of anything that you can't do without the touch bar. And actually, probably most of the people who have a touch bar, I have one on my last laptop, don't use the touch bar because you're so used to just clicking on the button the way that you always have. So the MacBook Pro has an internal fan. So if the computer were stressed to a point that it was barely hanging on and really getting warm, that internal fan would cool it down. The M1 chip is not supposed to need that. And so it is there with the Pro. And so you might say, well, why do they put it there if the chip is so great? You know, if you were running really large graphics programs or, you know, multiple at the same time kinds of large programs, you might need that fan. For day-to-day use, typical use of our staff, the MacBook Air should do just fine. The Pro comes with a larger charging brick, a 61 watt charging brick as opposed to a 30 watt charging brick, so it would charge more quickly. And then, like I said before, the technical specs are identical. You can configure them to what you would like to have them, how you would like to have them perform. So in looking at this lease, going with the MacBook Airs with that recommendation, the price allows for some flexibility. So there are several of us who have been using these MacBook Airs now for a couple of weeks, and we are happy with them. They're great. They're working well. But because we're looking at a total cost of around $127,000 instead of $168,000 a year, there's a little bit more wiggle room in that capital budget for the next 4 years that we can use for other needs in the district. So that's kind of a nice perk with this. The main operating system is the same for what we're used to right now with the Mac tools that we've currently been using. So that provides continuity and familiarity to our staff. The Airs, like I said previously, are a significant upgrade from our current MacBook Pros. Our current MacBooks are an Intel i5 processor. And they have half the RAM and half of the hard disk space as well. So this is a significant increase in performance. We are not purchasing a base model laptop when we look at this MacBook Air. We've gone up in a couple of steps of what we could get for a MacBook Air. But that does future-proof us a little bit, that we don't pick right now what's the low-end model that next year something's going to come out that is not going to function on that laptop anymore, or maybe 2 or 3 years down the road that they'll be too slow to function. We want to be a little bit future-proofed in terms of having something that outperforms maybe our next year needs, but can take on those things that we don't necessarily know are coming our way. One of the other requests we had from staff was, could they have an extra charger? We have heard this request many times. And is it possible? It sure is. It just comes with a price tag. And so I put that here just so we could see, well, what would it cost to get an extra charger? So this would be 400 additional chargers. And you can see the numbers there, $27,000 for the 30 watt that comes with the Air, and $35,000 for the 61 watt that comes with the Pro. Another request from our feedback was to have additional laptops on hand. And one of them said, in case they're forgotten or something like that. We do have the daily sub laptops on hand, like I mentioned. So if a teacher were in a bind and they needed one, they could likely use one of those daily substitute laptops. We do have 20 of those that have the new updated ports that match our teacher computers that we purchased with the CARES funding, as we needed extra devices this year to manage distance learning. So some of those are already on hand, and then we have enough built into the lease to put a few extras in the buildings as well for those kind of needs that arise and you need something right away to keep your class going. Additional questions that were in that staff feedback that are less practicable include these bottom 3 points. So there was a question about, could students have the same device as teachers? And we currently have our iPad lease for students that runs through the 2022 to 23 school year. So a change to laptops would be a significant cost increase. And also when we look at iPads, we're looking at an iPad that's discounted to $274, a $50 case, and a $50 crayon. So we're talking about just shy of $400 for an iPad for a student, not talking about $1,300 for a laptop. So it is quite a big cost increase to go to laptops for students. Somebody also asked about having additional ports and a variety of ports. The MacBooks, all of the MacBooks only use the Thunderbolt 3 USB-C ports. So there's a single port that does everything, and you do need adapters to go to multiple different systems that you might connect to. There are models that have 4 ports instead of the 2, but they do cost significantly more. The base price of one of those models would be $1,699 per device. So another significant increase that would be, in my opinion, hard to justify for the cost. And then we've also had questions about the option to purchase the current laptops. If staff could purchase the laptop that they're using, that is not an option for us. In order to sell, we would have to use an auction method so that everybody, any of the public, could have an option to purchase those computers as well. And what we will do is use a competitive bidding process to sell them as a full lot of all of those computers. The other questions and comments that I saw have focused on training and the transition between current laptops to a new laptop, and whether or not our technology staff would be able to manage the change. So I mentioned already that because we're looking at Macs again, the new devices function very similarly to the current devices. We will continue to provide the same kinds of training that we have been providing, as well as any additional training that is needed to get people up and running and able to use these tools. We have really robust technology in this district and a lot that we can be doing with it. So we do want our staff to feel confident in utilizing those tools. So the summer learning series will have a few days in the summer where we can actually hopefully come and do that in person, or we will do some of that virtually maybe as well. recorded Zoom meetings, and then Apple Teacher Program is pretty outstanding. The Apple provides very good professional development on how to use their tools in a classroom environment. The laptops will be ordered as soon as we can. So once we have approval of this lease, we're looking at that April board meeting for that, the first April board meeting. We'll order and hopefully we'll get them, before the end of the school year. Hopefully they have devices on hand available, ready to ship, and they come within a few weeks. That would be outstanding. So we do hope to have them on hand before the end of the school year, and we would be able to swap those out with teachers before the end of the year. We would never require the teachers to turn them in before the end of the school year. They've got plenty that they're working on, and some will be excited and some will not want to make the change. And so we would work to, if they were ready and wanted to change it, we would allow that. Otherwise, it would be something that would happen, the day after the last day of school, something like that. Technology staffing, I have to say, we have an outstanding technology staff. I could not be more grateful for our technology staff. We were lucky to add a tech specialist this year. So that sets us up pretty nicely to help with a transition like this. We will be able to manage this. We have prior experience with changing out our laptop lease, for example, or our iPad lease. This would be, I guess, our first switch of laptops, but we've managed thousands of iPads at once before, and I'm pretty sure we can manage 400 computers. So that I don't have a question about. Also, we purchased the Jamf management for our MacBooks and for our iPads, and that allows such a simple process for teachers to set up a new computer and to install the software that they need, and that can all be done pretty hands-off from the tech person. Once you get your laptop, you sign in with your username, and it knows who you are and it knows what software to give you. You just click and install the ones that you want. So that process really helps that we have that remote management option. So that's the information of the lease, the overview of what it would look like for the next 4 years if we're to go with this recommendation. And I would certainly take any questions that you have.
Great. Thank you, Kim. Questions, comments board members have? Noel?
Is the contract for maintenance and repair pretty much transparent between our current laptop and the new?
We don't purchase any additional warranty on our laptops, if I think that's what you're asking about, Noel.
Yes.
So they would have just like the standard year-long warranty. You can purchase an additional warranty, but it is quite expensive and more expensive than we have paid in repairing laptops as needed. So it's not something that I think is advantageous for us.
Let me ask the question in a different way. The repair for the current ones, will the repair for the new ones be about the same as the repair for the cost of the repair for the current ones?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Tom?
Thanks, Kim, and thanks for a good option here. A couple things. I thought I saw that the touch bar was going to be going away or because people didn't use it or didn't like it in the MacBook Pro.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah.
I think that is the truth. It still does exist right now. And so if we were to lease a MacBook Pro right now, it would come with a touch bar.
So why do people need extra chargers?
It's a convenience piece. And so if you are moving around with your laptop on a regular basis, you plug in every day at school and then you bring it home, and you want to be able to plug in at home, it would allow that without having to unplug, which might, depending on where you plug in your laptop, could be a little bit of a crawl behind a desk or something, or reach behind a desk for somebody. The new ones with their battery life as well, it's exceptional. And if you used it both days on the weekend, all day, you would need to charge it. If you went home on Friday with a charged laptop and used it for pretty typical use, you would make it through the weekend. That's not guaranteed for the full 4 years of the lease, though. We all know that our devices at some point start to have some battery life decrease. but so far they are performing very well.
But potentially the people could just take their charger home with them at the end of the day. Does the computer come with a pack at all, a case?
It does
Or-
not.
Does not. Okay. And then I had a question on the current lease has 125 Apple TVs and the cost associated with that, but in the proposed lease, those TVs are not included, or it's not,
Right.
or how-
Because we're at a point now where we have already placed Apple TVs on all of the common area displays and classroom displays in our buildings. So at this point, you should be able to walk into any area that has either a TV monitor on the wall or a classroom projector and connect to that Apple TV that is connected to the display. It's not something that goes with the computer, and be able to share from your iPad. So a student could run a presentation that way, or from your MacBook for the teacher to run it. So if you are to visit our schools right now, we see those Apple TVs in use all the time. And it's pretty rare at this point to see a teacher tethered to a wall to run their presentation. They are typically around the classroom, sitting near the front of the classroom, not necessarily at their desk, but able to present wherever they might be in the classroom.
So do we own those TVs then? And we're not
We do.
leasing them? Okay, so
So each of,
go
yeah,
ahead.
each of these leases comes with a $1 buyout option. And so we, at the end of the lease, own the equipment for that $1 buyout, and then we're able to either sell it or continue to use it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I can also, just if you'd like clarification, because that was a little bit confusing that those other items were included in that lease from 2016. The MacBook Pro price at that point was $1,363. So pretty similar to the MacBook Air price. Still a little bit more than the MacBook Air price right now.
Great questions. Thanks, Tom. Other questions, comments? Corey.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a question about, well, I have first a comment. Thank you for the work you put into looking at the different options and saving the district money, because I think the MacBook Air is a pretty comparable device, as you said, and it is a significant savings. So I have a question about a little bit about the math. So the current lease, we can buy all the current computers for $1 each and then go around and sell them to in bulk to whoever we want. Is that correct?
It's
what
a
you said-
$1
just said?
buyout, a $1 buyout for the entire lease.
Okay, and is that the same condition with the new option, the new lease that we would be signing? Okay. Because it looked about, I did the math, it looked like about $35 savings per device by doing the lease. So I was just trying to see if there was, I assumed you all did the numbers and figured out the best financial option. So just curious about that. But yeah, no, thank you for looking at the options, and I think the MacBook Air is a good option. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Thank you, Kim. It's great. First and foremost, I'm so glad you acknowledged your staff. I mean, the technology support that we're able to provide our staff is just top notch, and you work so incredibly hard. And it's just great that you be able to, you have an ongoing commitment to training and development of our staff with technology. And so that's really great to see. And I appreciate Corey's comment. Your proposals are always well thought out, well researched. I appreciate that you surveyed the staff. My question, and you're always able to really get us at a better place. When I think about the iPad lease and what we were able to do, with that, and now with the laptops, it's really, really good. My question is, do you have any concerns around availability in terms of that April timeframe? Because I know obviously you really do want to get those devices in before June.
Well, thank you for your kind comments. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't have any concern about availability. I think this year has taught us a few things about what you can and can't get when you want it. There has been high demand for a lot of technology tools this year. And so an order can come in immediately. Even the ones that we got, we purchased 10 just as a trial. And those took longer than we expected to get them. And they're here, which is great. And I have to imagine that production is doing well, but yes, I mean, could there be a delay? There could. And what I'm very grateful for is that we're not running up on the front end of a school year with that need. And so we are able to sell our current lease, but we don't have to sell our current lease until we're ready. So I'm not afraid that we wouldn't be able to carry out a transition of these laptops. Do I want them to come a week after we order them? Yes. That's probably not very feasible, but if they came within 3, that would be great.
Right. Okay. Good point. You have devices. So that does make it significantly less stressful versus where we were 4 years ago, obviously, when, we were doing a major replacement of devices with the launching of the laptops for teaching staff. So tell me about the competitive bidding process. What is the marketplace right now? Do you have expectations for what the current laptops will sell as a bulk sale?
I haven't started to look at what I think we would actually recoup from that sale. I tend to estimate something like 1 year of the lease payment that we've made. So if we look at our entire lease payment, now that included other computers, we would likely sell those MacBook Airs that we leased at the same time. So it would all go into one lot. And if we were able to recoup, say, $300 to $400 per machine, I think is very reasonable. But we don't know until we get the numbers out there and we see how many other people are trying to sell their computers. I think there's a pretty high market for having these computers right now too. And we have seen that they have kept a value pretty well. So we would start that process once we know we have the other ones on hand.
Sure. Okay, great. Yes, Dr. Hillman.
So I think we just need to take a moment and thank Kim and Val, who helps on the lease side of this, and the vision that we had 4 years ago. So the shift that we made 4 years ago was pretty seismic. We moved from a Windows-based desktop computer environment to a laptop environment. And of course, it was well thought out. The transition went well. We did a few technical issues with the model that we got at the time, but the vision that we had for what we wanted to be able to do was there. And I just want everyone to stop and consider what the last year would have looked like if we would have had teachers with desktop computers. And we think about just even in the really early days of the pandemic, when people were nervous to come into a building, even when they had their own 900 square foot classroom, we were able to tell everybody, you stay home. You've got your equipment, you've got all the stuff that you need. And that victory was fought several years before that when we made that change. And this board had the vision to move from where we purchased computers on an as needed basis with having all these different kinds around, and the ability to support them was very difficult because not all of the equipment was the same. And that really seismic shift set us up to be able to have as successful as possible of a year that we've had. I invite you to think about what would it have been like had we still been using that old model. So I really appreciate the work that Kim and the team have done. I also want to take this opportunity to remind people, you heard the numbers. So Kim, how many laptops or how many iPads do we have in the district right now?
We have about 4,500
4,000
iPads.
And you heard tonight 400 laptop computers. Now, in many industries, you have a ratio of maybe one technician per maybe 40 or 50 devices. We have 7 members of the technology staff in this district, 7. And I think that the efficiency in which we have used the tools to be able to support teachers and students is pretty incredible. And so I think oftentimes with technology services, it's about the problem that I have is more important than everybody else's problem, right? I mean, if my iPad doesn't work, my goodness, tech services can't get to me fast enough. But when you think about those numbers, 7 technicians for over 4,400 devices, and that's not counting the Apple TVs or the projectors or the speaker systems, I think that we can be really proud of the work that our technology services staff has done. And I invite, the board members and our community to make sure that they thank them, because they're the unsung heroes of the last year, being behind the scenes and only really hearing from people when something doesn't work. Because guess what? They don't call Kim up and say, well, that worked great. That's not the kind of calls that tech services gets. So Kim, on behalf of the district and the community, we thank you and your team for all that you have done behind the scenes to make the pandemic as bearable as it possibly could have been, from the perspective of having the equipment and the software ready to go. So congratulations.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. I will just add a bit of gratitude for that. I know, Matt, you covered that exceptionally well, to thank many involved in making sure that we have the equipment that we need. But I am grateful to work in a district that has supported the change to allow our teachers to be mobile, and also our K-12 students. It's just this year that we got to all of the kindergarten, first and second grade students with iPads. And so to look now and say we solidly have kindergarten through 12th grade with one-to-one iPads. We know that every kid has a device and has access to the learning that their teacher is preparing for them. And we know that their teacher has a device that is similar and can help the students use their devices as well. And that all of them work together with the classroom technology. So we are, I'm grateful to work at a district that has supported that shift.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, yes, the board echoes Dr. Hillman's words of appreciation. So thank you, Kim, and to your staff.
Thank you very much.
We will see you in April, or yeah, you may be here in April or not. We know it'll be an item for individual action, so we'll move on it then.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next item for discussion, Erin Bailey, Director of Community Education, is here to do an annual discussion around facility rental and service fees. Welcome, Erin.
Thanks, Julie. Good evening, board members. This is a brief presentation, but it does provide the annual review of the district's facility use policy. And in the information I included in your board packet, it does just kind of give reference. So the changes that were made by the board to policy 902 were approved on August 12th of 2019. And then the procedures that accompany that policy went into effect last July 1st of 2020. As you are all aware, this has been a drastically different year in the life of facilities for the school district in how we have given access to outside facility users. So I did highlight what last fiscal year did look like in regards to facility use by external groups, and then of course where we were at for this current year, which of course for this current year we began renting those facilities on November 9th. We then paused those rentals starting on the 19th due to the increase in COVID cases in the county and truly throughout the state. And then we resumed renting facilities on January 4th. And again, this year we have just been renting to youth sports associations at this point, but we have continued to do that on a very regular basis since January 4th. So to summarize, we have not had a lot of operational use of the changes that we had put in, the main changes being the changes to the fee structure. We haven't had a lot of use of that, as you well know, since we put those in place last July 1st. So I don't, at this point, I'm not recommending any changes to policy 902 and do just recommend the updating of procedures to reflect the addition of rentable conference rooms located at the Northfield School District office. And I did include in the board packet as well the community use of school facilities, just for you to reference kind of what does that, adding those conference rooms, so it's a better understanding of kind of what this price structure will look like for that too. And with that, I would take any questions.
Thank you, Erin. Questions, comments board members have? All right, no questions or comments. Thank you, Erin. It is great to have this yearly review, and we know it's a little bit of a unique year for sure. I think, it comes to us recognizing really what an asset to the community our district facilities are. And we're so, we're grateful that we're able to, allow and have our community use, our facilities. So, and we have the we have the guidelines in place to do that and to, be able to utilize this asset for the community. So thank you. I imagine now as you said, becoming more, probably more facility recommendations coming through fields, et cetera, as people start looking towards spring than where you were likely this fall or winter?
Yes, so we are starting, I mean, we are still renting just to we have not expanded out beyond youth sports associations, but we are seeing the outdoor rentals now increase as the baseball associations and other outdoor softball start to kind of plan their season. I think we've learned in this last year, as everyone has, I think more decisions are made closer to start dates. And so while some years we may have had spring and summer well on the planning docket, at this point it's a little bit delayed, but I think that is how as to be expected with this year.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on now to the 21-22 Internal Service Fund. And here to present that is Director of Finance, Val Mersdorf. Welcome, Val.
Thank you. Good evening. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, why don't you put it into full screen? So go to the slideshow mode.
Yeah. All right. So tonight I'm going to talk about the Internal Service Fund proposed budget for 21-22. So just as a refresher on what our Internal Service Fund is, it is a separate operating fund that accounts for our self-insured health and dental plans. We went with the self-insured model for our dental plan in fiscal year 06, and we added the health insurance in 2012. The revenue for that fund is made up of the premiums that the district contributes and the employees contribute, and then any retirees that are on the plan as well, and the portion that they contribute, and then a little bit of interest as well. And then the expenditures are our actual claims that are paid, and then the administration costs of the plan. So we currently use Delta Dental and Medica. We switched back to Medica just about a year ago now. It is a standalone fund, so when you look at our audit, they're separate financial statements. It's not included in the same section with our general fund and child nutrition. They're separate standalone statements. And then our stop loss coverage has been at 125,000 per member per year for about, I want to say about 3 years now. So I'll talk about dental first. Our participation has been really consistent the last several years, hovering right around 600 total members. And the monthly premium, as you can see, has not increased. It actually has been the same since we implemented self-insurance, and we decreased the premium for about 2 years to help spend down some of the fund balance. This is an incredibly consistent program. It's performed very well, and our consultant is always impressed with the way our claims and the way it operates. It's not consistent with what they see with other school districts and their dental funds. So whatever we're doing, it has been working really, really well. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find another location that has not raised their dental premiums in 16 odd years or so. So this is the financial summary. So as you can see, very consistent from year to year. The proposed budget is about 641,000. The charges for services is the premium revenue, and then about 5,000 for allocated interest. And then 557,810 is what's projected for the insurance claims. and about 41,540 for that administrative cost. Our goal, our fund balance goal for both of these funds actually is to maintain about 40% of our claims expenditures. And so you can see on the bottom, 239,000 would be our goal for this fund, and we're projecting to end at about almost 592,000. So very solid. We're approaching the point where we would probably consider reducing the rates again, just because it's not our intention to just grow the fund balance to a point that doesn't make sense. We'd much rather allow the members that are accessing this benefit to benefit from saving that a little bit. So, but that is a decision that the Benefits Advisory Committee would come to consensus on, but we're definitely approaching that, assuming it continues to trend positively. The health fund is not the same rosy picture. So our enrollment has been pretty steady. It's actually the same from last year, but we do have slightly fewer belly buttons is the term that they use. So there's less dependence on the program, but the same enrollment. The Benefits Advisory Committee did recommend, effective January 1st, increasing the premiums 5% for both plans. We have 2 plans that you can choose to enroll in, as well as some plan design changes. I missed that in my narrative initially. I've updated it, but I wanted to make sure I called that out. So the premium increase and the plan design changes are really designed to help slow the fund down. We've had some pretty significant claims experience the last couple of years. And we're trending in a direction that we don't want to go in, and it doesn't appear that it's going to correct itself in the near future. So we're making really targeted changes, increasing the revenue where we can, and some of the plan design changes were specific to some of the higher cost prescriptions and those sorts of things to help relieve the plan of some of those costs that it was going to bear. So revenue overall, it's really based on the enrollment. So the enrollment's been steady. Obviously, we increased it 5%, so you're going to see an increase in that charges for services. The interest earnings, again, we have a pooled cash method with our funds, and so it is an allocation based on the balance in that fund at a monthly average. And so we are expecting the interest revenue to decline slightly in the coming year. So projecting just a smaller amount for that. The insurance claims is really where you're going to see the significant shift. So we had about $6.2 million of claims in our 18-19 school year. Last year we had 7 million, which was a pretty significant jump. And as you saw in my narrative, I'm also recommending that we revise the current budget because this is clearly not going to be keeping pace with the level of claims that we've been seeing recently. So I'm recommending the revised budget to have 7.3 million in claims this year, and then 7.7 million next year. So those are pretty significant. Administrative fees, that is the cost for Medica to actually pay out the claims and those sorts of things, have our people enrolled, and that is about 903,000 as projected. A significant portion of that is our stop loss insurance, so that's the 125,000. So in this claims number, the max we pay for any one member is 125,000, and anything that is incurred above that is covered by that insurance. But obviously, everyone knows how insurance works. You pay a premium for that. So the more claimants we have experiencing those high claims and getting closer to that threshold or exceeding that threshold, the more that we end up paying for that. And in my narrative, I talked a little bit just about the experience that we've seen with our high claimants. We've seen not only a dramatic increase in the number of people that are incurring very expensive claims, but the number of people that are actually just in total going over. When we made the switch to go from 100,000 to 125,000 for our stop loss insurance, we were averaging 3 to 4 people going over that 100,000, and they were going over by $50,000 to $75,000. And coincidentally, the year that we made that change was the year that we saw this pretty significant shift. Excuse me. And we now have multiple people exceeding it by hundreds of thousands of dollars. We do have a really access to a really great analytic tool with our consultant that allows us to kind of dive in a little bit while certainly keeping the individuals confidential and their situations confidential, but it gives us some trend data about how we think, is it a kind of a one-time expenditure? Are these ongoing chronic conditions? And right now the data is suggesting that the majority of our high claimants are ongoing conditions. So we're going to continue to see this trend. So that's why we felt it was really important as the Benefits Advisory Committee to make sure that we're appropriately increasing the revenue. We're likely going to have to do this multiple years in a row. But I also want to say that we have not increased our premiums in 7 or 8 years. I should have looked that up before this meeting, but that is unheard of. We're in a really, really excellent position of strength to manage it. And we have done an excellent job growing the fund balance so that we can absorb some of this and kind of not have to have a 20% increase in our premiums like you've seen across other districts who don't have this model. So we can be more strategic about that increase. But it is not trending in the way that we want, but we're in a good position to respond to that and make sure that we're making sure our premiums are set appropriately so that ultimately the fund needs to be self-sustaining. So you can see the fund balance goal is the same, the 40% of claims. So we are projecting to end slightly below that. Again, having $2 million is still very healthy. The 40% is kind of an industry standard that our consultant recommended. And so we will likely recommend an increase again in January for the premiums. But overall, this is one of the greatest stewardship stories in our district, in my opinion. We were leaving quite a bit of money on the table with Blue Cross Blue Shield when we were in the other model. Excuse me. And to be able to say that we have not increased our premiums in 7 years is absolutely unheard of. And our employees have been the direct beneficiaries of that program. And the Benefits Advisory Committee did a lot of work to make that happen. And I just think it's a great story to tell. So while it wasn't as rosy as it maybe has been in past years, we're still in a good spot financially to address it. But that is the current recommendation. So the revised budget is just the claims change, and then the proposed budget. The revised budget will be on the next board meeting for approval, and then the proposed budget will be with the budget book at the meeting in May. So I will entertain any questions you have.
Thank you, Val. Questions, comments? Amy?
Thank you for the presentation. I'm just wondering if you could remind me how the costs are shared between the employees and the district, and then who's going to be shouldering the increase in the charges?
Sure. So right now, the premium, I would say it's probably about an 85-15 split between the employer contribution and the employees. So the district's contributing 85%. When we raised the premium January 1, it went down to probably 81 or 82% for the district contributions. So because the board contribution is part of the teacher's contract, that is negotiated every other year. And so the rates were locked. We're going to begin negotiating with the teachers this spring. And so, but that current rate is locked through December 31st in that contract. So the 5% increase that happened January 1 was completely on the employees' portion of that contribution. When we negotiate with the teachers, obviously that is an item that we can negotiate with them, and whatever that is settled on will then be effective January 1st next year. And then if we will likely have to increase rates again, and that will obviously be part of the negotiation process as well. But for this calendar year, that increase is completely on the employees. But the overall breakdown is, like I said, of 82, 81% is contributed by the district.
Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions, comments? Tom?
Thanks for the report, Val. Two things. One, the dental is looking really good. And so one option is to reduce the rates. Is another option to give a premium holiday where they would maybe not pay for a month or two?
So when we did the premium holiday probably 5 years ago, 6 years ago, as to offset the increase we were seeing in our health insurance. It must have been like 8 years ago now. Time is going really fast these days. So that is an option. I would say we're not fans of doing it for a month or two because just because of the way our payroll is structured. All of the teachers are salaried, and we typically have things all mapped out in the system so that they go for the whole year. And so we typically have reduced it in an amount that we can do for an entire year so that people aren't kind of seeing swings from paycheck to paycheck. They have some consistency for that year. But yes, that is absolutely an avenue that we could look at as to help offset that increase in the future.
Right. And then the second question is, the administrative fees for the health are like 20 times the dental fees. I realize there's different components to it, but I mean, it's almost 10% of the, or it's more than 10% of the cost of the whole program. I mean, are there where it just seems out of line?
I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on that. I can certainly get you some more information. My gut says that the health insurance is a lot more volatile. And so the risk that the companies take on is significantly more. The example in my narrative is that the dollar amount that's over that 125 was absolutely picked up by Medica. And so they take on a significant portion of that risk. You know, you don't get to control, you don't have, I would say a dental emergency is very significantly different than a health emergency in cost and treatment and all of those things. I would also say that there's significantly less competition for dental. Delta Dental has nearly every district that I'm aware of. They're very, very prominent in Minnesota. And so I think that they have the market and are pretty solid in where they're at. There's much more competition on the health side here in Minnesota. But I do think it's more about the risk that they're taking on with some of these claims and management of that.
Thank you.
And Tom, I think too, just to remind people, we do a competitive bid for that administrative service. Val, I think it's every 3 years, if I'm right.
Every 2 years, actually.
Every 2 years. And so I think one of the things that has helped us is the Health Insurance Transparency Act, which allows us to basically go out for a second round of quotations. And so we know that when that Health Insurance Transparency Act was first implemented, we saw a pretty substantial improvement in the quotations, basically between the first, what I call a first round and a second round. But Val, would you so this is also part about the marketplace. And when you're doing a competitive bid circumstance like we are, we're getting the best price that we can in the marketplace. So would you just describe a little bit about how that works, Val?
Sure. So our we use One Digital. That is our consultant. And what happens is they take our claims data for the last couple of years, our use of stop loss insurance, which is again an important component because it gives them an assessment of how likely they are to see high claims for us. And they go out and say, we need a quote on how much you would run this program for. So we set up all of our own people in Medica, but Medica processes the claims, makes sure that it matches our plan document, that they're paying for the appropriate things. All of those pieces happen through them. And so there's a certain window of time that they can respond. And then Molly and I and our consultant meet and we open the bids and kind of do a quick assessment. And then our consultant actually does the full calculation for us to say how much it would cost us annually if we had the same exact enrollment and those kinds of things. And then based on that analysis, let's say like we're with Medica, and switching health plans is not something that we take lightly. It's emotional for staff. It's a lot of work for both HR and finance. And people get very nervous when you're switching their health insurance. So if we don't have to do that, that is something we would prefer not to do. And so let's say Blue Cross comes in with a better admin rate, and basically what our consultant can do for that second round that Dr. Hillen talked about is they can go back to Medica and say, here's your rate. We have another quote that's $300,000 less than this. Can you give us another quote? And then Medica will go back. And then basically if they're interested in providing a second quote, then they will do that in that second round. Sometimes we've had vendors say, nope, that was my bottom line. But more often than not, we do get a better price with that model. And so then we'll do the second round of opening and then that analysis and then choose from there who came in with the best rate. And if it's, if Blue Cross is, a little bit less and Medica is close, we would typically recommend staying with Medica just because of the actual amount of time and things that go into switching. It has to be a fairly significant savings for the district for us to consider switching. But that's the typical process is we can go directly to a vendor and say, we got a better quote by $500,000. Can you sharpen your pencil? And that's not typical in a bidding environment, especially for public entities. And so it's one of the few areas where I think the legislature did something great for us, but that's the typical process.
So we can expect that those administrative fees are going to be going up considerably given what's been happening the last couple of years?
I'm anticipating that. We did do, I'm pretty sure we just did the bids this past fall. and recommitted to Medica. So they have typically had kind of a cap where they'll increase it, but not over a certain percentage. And I want to say it was like 15%, which is still very significant, a 15% increase on that number. But I would expect them to increase it just because of the stop losses. They're likely losing money on that portion of it for us right now.
Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions, comments? Okay. Val, thank you. And of course, we can never pass up the opportunity to talk about this winning the Government Innovation Award in 2018. I mean, I know that this, as you said, is not, as Rosie have a picture of we've seen, but we know that there are districts that have faced double-digit increases in their health plan for many, many years. And we know that this is a significant recruitment tool for the district. So it's all around a success for sure. You know, again, some challenges, but I think I appreciated the claims history in the background you gave us, and we know how diligent the benefits committee works and the relationships that you've developed with the consultant and ensuring that we're in the best possible position. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on now to our next item. Our next item for discussion, which is legislative update. Talking through a few things happening at the legislature. Do you want to get started, Dr. Hillman? And of course, the Legislative Action Committee of the board will be able to provide some updates as well.
Yes, so thank you for the opportunity to give a little bit of a legislative update. And of course, when we're at the beginning of the March, there is a lot happening at the Capitol. And I'm going to just bring it to about 4 points that I want to share with you this evening about things that we're really paying attention to as school leaders, and how we are talking with our legislators and with our professional organizations about how proposed legislation may impact us. First, I think we all know the biggest news coming out of St. Paul in the last several weeks was the dramatic change in the February forecast. As you recall, in November, we were talking a $1.4 billion deficit for the next biennium. And with the February forecast here in Minnesota and at the end of February, we're looking at a $1.6 billion surplus over the next biennium. So a significant change. Really, if you look at it, the surplus that we have now is roughly what we thought we had last spring prior to the pandemic. So really some great news. There's a number of things that why that has happened, but it's going to give the legislature some more tools to address some of the financial issues that the state has, and specifically that school districts have. So we're really thrilled to hear that. The 3 or 4 items I'm going to focus on is, as you know, we are a low property wealth district. And so as members of Schools for Equity and Education, we're always looking at those bills that increase referendum equalization aid. So Senate File 626, authored by Senator Chamberlain, does that. Remember, when we get an increase to referendum equalization aid, the district doesn't get any money back, but taxpayers do, because the state picks up a greater share of the taxpayer referendum burden. So we have worked very hard over the years with Schools for Equity for Education to make sure that we continue to have that equalization aid. We've all seen the Capitol Pizza video over time, and trying to make what referendum dollars are in each district a little bit more fair. And the other really critical thing is we always lobby for referendum equalization aid to stay in the tax bill, because the tax bill has a separate target than what the education bill does. And so we have lobbied hard for a long time to make sure that we try to keep that referendum equalization aid in the tax bill as opposed to the education bill, because we want that to come out of the tax bill target as opposed to the education target. Couple of other items I want to point out to you is, of course, we are really looking at both the governor's proposal and then the House and Senate's counter or update, the House's updated proposal, House File 1064, that are really looking at addressing, really expediting the legislation to address declining enrollment aid, and then also summer school funding measures. We are working hard. In fact, we had a summer school meeting last week. What would our summer opportunities look like? And you think, oh, it's the last week in February, but our people who run those programs are already nervous that we're getting started late to be able to get those programs in order. But we are waiting to know. We've been hearing we're going to get some additional aid from the state and some from the federal government. And it's hard to build a program when you don't know exactly what the resources are going to be. We have decided we're going to build the program. We're going to use the dollars from the anticipated aid that we're going to get. We are in a financial circumstance where we can do that, and then be able to shuffle it when we know exactly what the dollars are. We're confident we're going to be able to put together a quality program that will be within the budgetary restraints that we have. But we just can't wait anymore. We have to start getting these things ready. We're pushing the start of summer school. We're looking to push a lot of the summer school back in the summer so that we have some more time to try to work through those pieces. But we really need to encourage our representatives and senators to expedite the approval of summer school funding measures. And then, of course, declining enrollment aid to help districts who have seen a massive decline in enrollment this year due to the pandemic. I also really want to point out, we did a staffing meeting this past week where we're looking at our staffing models, and we're looking at the probationary staff that we have and how we're advancing them to the next year in their career here. And one bill that we have a real concern about in the House, it's House File 1376. There's a part of the Professional Education Licensure Standards Board that's called PELSB for short, is looking at doing some modifications to the new tiered licensing system. So if you remember, we just went to this tiered licensing system 2 years ago in an effort to try to really address the teacher shortage and create alternate pathways for people with other specific backgrounds to be able to enter the teaching field, improve their skills, and then move forward to what a tier 3 license is, the equivalent of somebody graduating from a teacher preparation program. When we went through this staffing listing last week, especially in special education, we have a number of tier 2 teachers who are doing a great job and who are following the process that this bill could impact, because it would limit the number of tier 2 renewals that you could have. This is not good for schools. And in fact, we support wholeheartedly maintaining the existing tiered licensure system for a period of time. It's only been running for a couple of years. Of course, there may need to be some technical fixes to some things, but this would really hamper schools' ability to be able to get quality candidates and get any candidates, frankly, in some of our hard to fill areas. So we are really working hard to make sure that we can maintain the tiered licensure system that was put into effect just a couple of years ago, a bipartisan effort, again, to try to be able to expand the teacher pool. And then finally, what we know that there is a plethora of new mandates being proposed in a number of bills, especially in the House. And while we certainly applaud the desire to provide policy at the state level to guide local school boards, this is not the time for significant additional policy requirements. There is no such thing as free policy. And yet often when there's a policy implemented at the state level, we are expected to come up with the dollars out of our own funding to be able, for the existing funding, to be able to implement it. And as what I will tell you across the state, I think Minnesota can be proud of how we have handled the pandemic, but this is a year that all school officials, all teachers, all support professionals have done more than what they ever thought possible. And then to turn around and have to implement a whole bunch of new policy mandates is not what we're looking for. So what we are asking is for the legislature to demonstrate restraint and to limit, if not postpone, any kind of policy changes or policy mandates that schools would be required to do for the next year. As you know, we are supporters of having policy changes at the state level to create a more consistent educational experience across the state. This is not the year to do it. We need a year to be able to learn and understand how we come out of the pandemic into recovery. We are already working on a number of those kinds of initiatives here at the local level, and we would just like to have a break from the state for a period of time. So in terms of that new policy, what we're asking for is for people to just show restraint. We understand there are some policy things that have to happen. We get that, but we're just saying, let's be judicious about what those might be. So you'll see we've got some important dates coming up. On March 12th, we have the first deadline for bills that's coming up later this week. March 19th is the second deadline. The third deadline is in April, and supposedly the regular session will end on May 17th. We will see how that shakes out. But that's my brief update this evening, and I invite Legislative Action Committee members to share their perspectives.
Excellent update. Of course, the $1.6 billion surplus being the best news there. Claudia, Corey, any updates? Claudia.
Just wanted to talk about how we did the Capitol, the virtual day at the Capitol. That was really neat, and Zach Pruitt did an excellent job of organizing us. We did meet with Representative Lippert and also Senator Dryham. And so we're a big group of us were able to present very well on all of the terrific points for funding Northfield Promise. That was a good time. Thanks.
Real quick, at our last meeting, we discussed House File 843, which addresses the basic formula allowance for going to 2 and 2, and then also tying that to inflation. Remains to be seen what happens with that, but I want to share that Representative Lippert, who represents us, has signed on as a co-author of that bill. So it's good news that we have support locally for that, and hopefully it resonates at the Capitol.
Excellent. Yes, Claudia mentioned it was really wonderful that Representative Lippert and Senator Draheim gave us Northfield Promise the opportunity to talk about the program. So part of Northfield Promise funding, it's $250,000 each year of the biennium. And if that is not funded, that those dollars will end July of 2021. So we all know the number of really significant ways that Northfield Promise programs support the school district. So we were very happy to have the opportunity to talk about those programs and how vital they are. So we do appreciate our representatives' time on last Wednesday. And it was really great to see there were over 15 community leaders that were present on the call talking to the representatives, our lawmakers in St. Paul about those programs. So the other thing then, end of March will be the targets will be released. The Education and Senate targets in terms of how much they're willing to spend on education. And we know that 2 and 2 on the formula is $400 million. So we hope that's at least the starting point, and it goes up from there. So thank you for the update. And again, we will provide updates at every meeting because this is an important funding year, and we'll continue to slog through the legislative process. Okay.
Julie?
Yes.
Can I ask a quick
Yes,
question? The federal relief thing that was just passed, does that impact anything?
So yes, we have been working to understand that legislation. We know that the Senate passed a modified version of the House bill over the weekend. What Tom is talking about, the $1.9 trillion American Recovery Act. We anticipate that the changes that were made around extension of unemployment benefits, an additional amount of unemployment benefit for folks through September was really one of the key points for the senators to come to a compromise on. So now that is done, my understanding is that bill now has to go back to the House, and I think it may even have to go back to the Senate before President Biden is able to sign it. So what we know is that is a wide-ranging bill that also has some pretty significant impact for schools. So we did talk with Representative Angie Craig's office, who was able to give us an analysis, and it looks like Northfield Public Schools, this is the preliminary piece, would be looking like we would potentially be able to get $3 million in relief from that. Approximately 650,000 of that would need to be reserved for summer programming to address learning loss. We are, of course, still waiting to hear what the details or the rules would be, right? Because if you remember, we had the first CARES funding where we have several years to spend it, right? In terms of it's really intended to be a stabilizing factor. Then we had the coronavirus relief funds that came, which we had about a 6-month window to be able to spend those dollars. What we understand is that the process for this is going to be more like the first round, which would be something in the line of a couple of years to be able to expend those funds. We're also waiting to look at what are the expendable purposes for those funds. And so what our hope would be is to look at how could we judiciously allocate some of those dollars to accelerate learning and to support students as they return to whatever normal looks like after the pandemic, while also using a significant portion of it to stabilize our budget to be able to create this 5-year budget plan that we'd like to be able to do. So we don't want to put so much of it in up front and then have to turn around and have some of those services disappear. We want to take a longer term approach. But again, we need to see the details. Once the president signs the bill, then the states will get their instructions, and then we will hear from the state as to how the allocations will be made, when we can expect to get those. Have heard we may not get those allocations until after July 1. So there's a lot of detail yet, but that was the projection from Angie Craig's office for us.
That's a great question, Tom. We were going to cover that, and I think we were going to talk about that during COVID, but it was a great time to bring that question up. And I think there is some thinking too that the state is waiting for the federal dollars that will be earmarked for summer programming before they move on the bills that we have all been encouraging them to move on, and there hasn't been much movement. So,
and I've also learned not to count on anything from the feds until we see a signed bill. So
good, could be an exciting week for that. All right, so we'll move on now to the policy committee recommendations. We have one policy tonight, policy 438 regarding student teachers. Dr. Hillman.
yes, so we continue with our policy committee to monthly go through policy, and we are reviewing, I think we reviewed 4 policies this month. One is ready to come for you for first reading tonight. So this policy just governs student teachers, and we had a pretty basic policy up until this time. And you're going to notice that we're really working hard to try to make our policies consistent across the board. So you're seeing an addition of a general statement of policy. You're seeing some student teacher assignments, rights, and responsibilities. This is to try to just flesh out to make sure that we're really clear about what the expectations and what the approach is to both approving student teachers, who are the main points of contact, and what student teachers can expect for things like equipment and accounts and things like that. So it's a fairly innocuous policy, really codifying the procedures that we had been using in practice.
Questions or comments about this policy? I just had one question. I understand that, we have the authorized, we have negotiated the agreements with specific colleges and universities for student teachers. Are students able to directly contact the district for a student teacher opportunity or assignment if they are from one of the negotiated agreements?
No, all of the placements are done by each university has their own student teacher placement office. And so we may have from time to time, there might be a student from a college who we don't have a regular agreement with, who may reach out and say, would there even be a possibility of, could I talk to my student teacher placement office? Most of the time, they actually start with a student teacher placement office, and they may say, I'm from the Twin Cities area or Southern Minnesota. I'd like to be able to potentially student teach there, even though I go to school in California. So once in a while, we'll have a unique agreement for a short period of time, but typically that has to be done through the university or college's student teacher placement office. And they call that a number of different things. That's the general term that I use for it.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. All right. So this is the first reading of policy 438. We will look to pass that as an item for individual action at our first meeting in April. Our next item for discussion is the American Indian Parent Meeting. Dr. Hillman.
Yes. So we are required to hold an annual American Indian Parent Meeting. And I want to be very clear that we're using the term American Indian Parent Meeting because that's the state and federal requirement for the program. So from here on out in the presentation, I'm going to talk about our Indigenous families, but we're required to use a specific term for the program. So annually, Mary Grace Hansen, one of her roles as the Director of Teaching and Learning before she retired, she ran this committee. We have approximately 10 families who have students who identify as Indigenous within our school district. So we have a chair who has been a continuing chair for the past several years. We've really struggled to get families to come to the annual meeting. This year we did it via Zoom. We did it last Thursday. We had 2 people arrive. What we did is we call it what I call a plus delta activity. So we asked the families what was going well for their students, what was the school district doing that was benefiting their students. And we had quite a great list of things there. We then asked, what are some things that you think the school district could do better to serve your children? And so we talked through that. And then we also have access to a grant. And so we did talk with the families at the meeting about what were the kinds of priorities that they would be interested in for this small grant funding from the state. The other part is we really have an interest in creating some more traction with this particular committee and making sure that we get more parents to join and more parents to give us their feedback. We've been very successful in some other circumstances getting family feedback, and we want to make sure that we're able to do that from our Indigenous families as well. So the committee agreed that we would move to meeting 3 times per year. And with Zoom and people understanding video conferencing so much more, it becomes simpler to be able to get people to join. So we'll look at doing 1 in-person meeting per year when a public health situation allows. And then the other 2 meetings a year we'll do via video conference. And our hope is that by getting the ball rolling of people knowing that we'll always have a meeting sometime in September, sometime in January, and then one closer to the end of the school year, that we'll be able to get it on people's radars a little bit sooner, and that people will then be able to, oh, yep, we've got that meeting. We set the dates for the year. People get it on their calendar, and we get what I call the flywheel turning, where the committee just starts to roll. So we had some very good feedback. Some of the ideas that the committee had about the grant was they'd really like to see us have an Indigenous Peoples Day celebration across the district, similar to how we have celebrated Black History Month and Cinco de Mayo. Just really this look about how can we make sure that we are sharing the beautiful culture of our Indigenous people, and doing so in a way that is something that celebrates that culture across the district. Also, looking at how do we continue to improve our staff's cultural competency. So they had an interest in helping fund some additional cultural competency training, as well as making sure that we continue to provide resources, books, materials, and other things that show positive examples of Indigenous peoples in work and in authorship. And so making sure that we continue so that our Indigenous students see themselves represented in our curriculum. So I was very grateful for their time. Sybil Betzinger is our committee chair. She's just outstanding. And we're going to continue to try to make sure that we bring families into this mix so that we can make sure that they're meeting on a regular basis. So I'm required to provide you with that report after the meeting, and then we'll be submitting our annual compliance paperwork tomorrow. And then we're going to have one more meeting yet this year. And then, as we said, we think some more frequent meetings of that group would get more involvement. So that is our report for the American Indian Parent Committee this year.
Excellent. Sounds like a really, really good meeting. Questions or comments? Tom?
I like the idea of including Indigenous people and their accomplishments in the curriculum. I think, we maybe just kind of overlook groups too, so that's a great idea.
Thanks, Tom.
Other questions or comments? I had a question, the grant dollars, so those come from the state?
Correct.
And how, is it based on our Indigenous population of the district, or how are those grant dollars assigned?
Yeah, so it's based on a population, and there's a minimal level that you can receive. So we typically have access to just under $20,000 a year.
Oh, okay, excellent. All right, thank you for that report. All right, we will go on to our last report, which, I'm sorry,
Oh,
Claudia.
I just
Thank you,
wanted to
Corey.
hear if there was parameters for how to use that grant.
Parameters. So there are some parameters. So for example, they really frown upon you paying salaries for folks. So they really are, the guidance that they provide is really on things around training. Again, things around celebrations, field trips, curricular review, curricular materials. So they're really focused on resources and things that would be directly impacting of the students rather than things like salary. So there's actually quite a bit of latitude in how you spend the money versus some other grants that we might get from the state. But in this case, really and I think there's even some ways that you can spend it in salaries, but it's very clear that they'd prefer us to spend it in other ways.
What about scholarships for students?
So scholarships, I do not believe would be within, because you're giving those dollars directly to an individual. But what could happen is it could go to some other programming that might inspire scholarships. So for example, an Indigenous Peoples Day celebration across the district and the community. We have other celebrations like the Cinco de Mayo celebration, where we have used some of those things community-wide to create some scholarship fund drives. And so the money can't be given directly as a scholarship. That's in fact another piece that they looked at was, could there be some additional support of the torch model, for example, so not necessarily a scholarship, but how can we encourage that post-secondary enrollment for students? So I would say that we would not be able to use it for a direct payout to students, but we could potentially use it in a way that would inspire the community to raise dollars for scholarships.
Excellent questions. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so our last item for discussion is COVID-19 response and operations update. Dr. Hillman.
Yes. So here we are. We are March 8th, and we're very excited in our school district because we are entering a phase where the vast majority of our staff members will receive their second dose of the vaccine over the next couple of weeks. So we had approximately 35 people get their second dose on Friday. That was through the county. This Wednesday, we will have 308 approximately staff members receive their second dose of the Moderna vaccine, with about 100 more getting their second dose on March 20th. So this is really great news. It's excellent when we think about 15% of the state has had one dose, about 7% having two doses, and we will have all of our staff, almost all of our staff who have wanted a vaccine done by March 20th. We've had some people who have come in afterwards that, oh, I was out of town, or I didn't see the email, or I've changed my mind. And thanks to Anita Ozzie, she is using a variety of methods to help connect those folks to vaccination. But for 1 week, we had no additional people. And then the next week we had 5 or so. And then this week we actually have 10 folks who are helping recommend just to get their first vaccine. But the vast majority of our regular staff will all be completed by this week. And even our substitutes and athletic coaches who don't have another job within the district by March 20th. This is significant, and it really raises a lot of hope within our school system. And so we want to thank the state of Minnesota and Northfield Hospital and Clinics, who both have prioritized vaccinating educators. Northfield Hospital and Clinics, as I've shared before, the only regional hospital that we know who prioritized educators for the vaccine. And I think you've seen the thanks that we have had for them. We recorded some really cool videos to share with them. So we're very excited about this. Now, with this, we know, and from studying, I would say we're in the first wave of districts that are getting everyone vaccinated. So there are a few school districts that are ahead of us by a few weeks. There are quite a few who are behind us by a few weeks. But you may have read that the second dose of both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine can have some side effects. And the side effects actually are good because it means that the vaccine is working. But for the person who's experiencing the side effects, not so fun. Now, what we understand from our friends at Public Health is that there's a range that these side effects how they can impact people. What we understand is approximately 30% of people after the second dose can experience, some side effects that just make you feel crummy. And about a third of those people may have a side effect where it could interrupt their daily living, for a short period of time. There's zero way that we have from scientists yet to predict how this is going to impact people. 308 people getting a second dose is over half of our staff and almost all of our bus drivers. And so we have made the decision to have a distance learning day on Thursday to be proactive. We unfortunately have seen several districts who needed to make a decision about moving their school day to a distance learning format, either the night before, once people got their second dose, or sometimes even the morning of. And we know that families and our staff prefer predictability. So this is the reason that we have called a distance learning day for Thursday. In talking with Public Health and with other folks who have experience with the second dose, we feel that one day is going to be sufficient. We know that there are some people who don't have side effects the first day and they develop them the second day. But talking with the people who have the most experience with this, they say one day should be plenty. So we thank our parents, we thank our staff, we thank our students for their flexibility. This is a short-term pain for a longer-term gain. Now, the key part is 14 days past your second dose There are a number of advantages. A person will no longer have to quarantine if they come into close contact with someone with COVID-19. That's between 14 days after the second shot, up to 90 days after the second shot. So we know that that's the window based on the research that is currently available. So we are incredibly grateful for the second dose. We are excited about that. We also wanted to be proactive and make sure that our families and our staff knew that we pay attention to these things. And while we understand a shift to a distance learning day isn't what everybody would want, we are grateful for their understanding. So that is around, and also I just want to share, we estimate about 90% of our regular staff have been vaccinated. So not everyone wants a vaccine. We're going to respect that, right? Because I've talked to some people who have said they're not going to get the vaccine, and there's a very personal story with each person. And so some of them are their own health related. There are other pieces with it. But when we think about having 90% of our staff vaccinated, we think that that's an incredible place to be, because it was 1 year ago this Friday where I was sitting at the MASA conference talking with my colleagues about what do we do this weekend? You know, people had these volleyball tournaments coming up. It was really, I mean, it was a stressful time for everyone. And so you think about within 1 year, the fact that we have 3 vaccines available in the United States is just unheard of in the history of our country, to have that kind of speed. And so we're so grateful to have that opportunity, but it's been a long road. There still is a long road ahead of us, because sometimes people misunderstand that the vaccination means we can stop doing all the other things that we have done to get here. And so we still are going to need to do some masking. The CDC did come out today with some exciting news about gatherings for people who have been vaccinated, but we're still waiting to see how Minnesota Department of Health takes those new guidelines and applies them in Minnesota. There's some other exciting things coming down the road, but we still have work to do. And that brings me to the next part, which is spring break. And I will tell you, we've talked a lot about spring break. You're going to see some post-secondary institutions who canceled their spring breaks. Very few public schools, if you had a spring break, did cancel their spring break. We talked about, do we have a buffer zone after spring break? What we know is from our experience is that if we say we're going to have a distance learning period after spring break, there's a substantial number of people who have the means to just extend their vacation and would do so. And so even if 10% of the people do that, we argue that we would probably have lost any benefit that we would have potentially gotten from a buffer. So we are not going to have a buffer after spring break. And instead, what we are going to do is we are going to strongly recommend testing for anyone who travels during spring break. We have already sent families with the list of places that they can go for a test. And if we really have a family who can't get to one of the dozens of community free testing sites, we will offer them a free test from the district's inventory of tests that we have purchased ourselves. So we're really encouraging people. We're not requiring people to quarantine. That's not a place where we think is our place as a public school district to be able to do that. But we're going to really push the testing for when people come back from spring break. We have also really encouraged people to look at the recommendations for travel. Now, while many people do travel for spring break, during those days off, people who stay in here in Northfield still may engage in activities that could be potentially dangerous to them to contracting the illness. So we're going to even encourage people, if they haven't gone anywhere, if they have socialized in a different way during that spring break period, we're going to encourage people to test coming back. So the spring break piece, I know there's a lot of people, that is the message I've gotten mostly from the less than 7 families who I have heard from. Their biggest concern is about what people do during spring break. So we are just pleading with people to follow the guidelines. If you must travel, to follow the guidelines, to make sure that you test when you get back and you follow the recommendations of the Department of Health. And if a family does choose to quarantine when they come back, we will work with them to try to make sure we can keep, their child's education going for that short period of time the best that we can. Finally, I just want to talk about our return. This is very exciting. Returning middle school, high school, and area learning centers back to school full-time for in-person learning. We are planning to make that transition on Wednesday, March 31st. You're going to see that we're going to use a pivot day on March 19th for middle school, high school, and ALC students. That means there's no classes that day at all for those students. That's a teacher planning day. Also that day, elementary school and Portage students, they follow the regular schedule. Then we go into spring break. Then we come back from spring break, and on March 29th, there are no classes for anybody because that's the regularly scheduled teacher preparation day. Tuesday, March 30th, we have a second pivot day for secondary teachers, which means no class for middle school, high school, or area learning center students. Again, that's to have teachers to be prepared for students to come back in person. And elementary school and Portage students will follow their regular Wednesday schedule. There's a lot of work that has to happen to be prepared for a full middle school and high school contingency to return. We stored quite a bit of furniture and during the hybrid model so that we could have the furniture out of the way. So at the middle school, we anticipate that's going to take a few days to put it back together. The high school, because of the way that the furniture had to be stored, we have a really awesome team, but they're saying it's going to take 3 to 4 days for potentially to be able to get everything out of storage and put back to where it needs to go. And then once teachers return, we also know there might be some additional movement and some other things that have to happen. So it isn't as if people are just taking the week off. There's going to be a lot of effort by Jim Colseth and our buildings and grounds team and our principals to make sure that everything is back in order, ready for when students come back for fully in person on March 31st. So again, coming back to why are we making that transition? The Rice County conditions have improved continuously week over week for the last couple of months. We know we've had very limited cases amongst our student population at the middle school and high school level since they came back in hybrid on February 2nd. And vaccination is another big reason while we feel we're ready to be able to bring students back in person. So that's my report this evening. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. Thank you. Questions, comments? Okay. Thank you for the incredible work you continue to do. It's just been a challenge and you're meeting it head on. So thank you.
One day at a time.
So that was our last item for report. So we can move on now to approval of the consent grouping. As a reminder, there was a few personnel items and a grant application in the table file that was added to the consent grouping. Is there anything anyone would like to pull from this consent grouping for separate consideration? Yes, Noel.
I don't want to pull an item, but I would like to have a bit of information regarding the impact of a leave of absence, and specifically in the area of salary, insurance, and seniority, and then follow-up obligations.
So Noel, you're talking about specifically the longer term leaves of absences?
Yes, yeah, the 3 years.
Yep. Okay. Let me just get to that page, Noel.
Is that
That was in the table file, correct?
The table file one, okay.
Yeah, is that a
Got it.
question that should come at another time?
Well, I think I can give you a brief piece. So when a teacher takes a leave of absence, an unpaid leave of absence as the ones that we're talking about, there is no salary, for that year. And in terms of all the other statutory benefits, if I'm not paid for that year, I don't get access to it for that year. So we really have a limited financial implication for that piece, and we are able to hire people, of course, to take those individuals' place. So a leave of absence, they still would maintain their seniority date because they're still technically on the system. They're just taking a leave of absence. So for all practical purposes, Noel, from that seniority date perspective, they would maintain exactly where they are. In some cases, we'll leave it at that they would maintain their seniority date. And then it's as if they were to not, they're not being paid. It's not any kind of a sabbatical or anything like that. So there isn't necessarily a district contribution in that way.
Thank you.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the consent grouping? Moved by Amy. Is there a second? Second by Tom. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. We'll move on now to item for individual action. We have one item this evening, the budget containment strategies that Val Mertersdorf presented at our March board or our previous board meeting in February. So I will ask for a motion, then we have an opportunity for questions and comments. So is there a motion to authorize district administration to enact the following strategies? Early retirement incentives for teachers, office employees, and educational assistants, exploring advertising revenue in key locations throughout the district, utilizing an online payment vendor for activity officials, and utilizing a maintenance ticket system to allocate staff salaries to long-term facilities maintenance on a project basis. Moved by Tom. Is there a second? Second by Amy. Questions or comments? Okay, I just wanted to make the comment that, we certainly appreciate all the work that Dr. Hillman and Val have done to bring these budget containment proposal forward. And I think in terms of the early retirement incentive, we just have to emphasize that this is strictly optional for our retired staff. This is an opportunity for them to participate. It has to work for them. Obviously, we have always valued our tenured teaching staff, and that this is just really an optional opportunity for them. And we'll just have to see if we reach the numbers that we will need to make this work. So just wanted to make that comment. So if we have no other questions or comments, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So that takes care of our items for individual action. The item for information tonight is the enrollment report through March of 2021. Dr. Hillman.
Yes, so you'll see that in the enrollment report, you're going to see we're at 4,005 students. That's the grand total. And if we look at our full-time only students, we're at 3,815 at this point. And that's the enrollment report.
I apologize. It's the enrollment report through March 1st, not through the entire month of March. Questions or comments? Tom?
I noticed that the biggest decrease is in the grade 8 in the middle school. Is there any explanation or thoughts?
Yeah, Tom, I don't have that information for you right now, but I'd also noticed that in the report, and we'll be digging into that this week.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on the enrollment report? Okay, I just appreciate that we're continuing to separate out the Portage numbers. Jeff?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, we're usually around 4,000, so be at 3,800. So what's the comment on that?
So I think you notice that across the state this year, public school enrollment is down by about 2%. And we did see an increase of students who went to homeschool this year during the pandemic. And so what we're expecting, based upon what we understand from families, is to see those students return post-pandemic. So we are not counting those chickens yet, if you will. We're going to make sure that we are conservative in planning our enrollment moving forward. But this is a phenomenon you're seeing across the state this year.
Okay, are there any other questions on the enrollment report? All right, thank you. So that takes us to future meetings. As a reminder, we do only have one meeting in the month of March because of spring break, and we don't want to be conducting board business when over spring break. So our next meeting then will be Monday, April 12th, followed by Monday, April 26th, and then as we move into May, Monday, May 10th. All of those meetings at 7 p.m. In our new boardroom at the district office, formerly Longfellow. So thank you for a great meeting this evening and for everyone's great comments and questions. So with that, I ask for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Noel. Is there a second? Oh, I'm sorry, Noel.
I would like to move to adjourn, but I think tonight is an example of something that we usually don't see, and that's the complexity of running the district. And we've got issues with laptop contracts, facilities rental, funding control, and the coronavirus management. And while it's related to education, it isn't the specifics of teaching. It allows teaching to occur, but there's a lot of things that this district does in addition that makes it possible to teach students. And I thank Dr. Hillman and the staff for that.
Thank you for that great comment, Noel. Okay, so Noel has moved that we adjourned after those wonderful comments. So is there a second? Second by Amy. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned.